Good evening, everybody. This is Nate G. and Dr. Doug Lisle. How you doing, Dr. Lisle?
Good to be back.
All right, we're great to have you back this week. So last week we had a great episode talking about love, sex, relationships, and dating, and all with this perspective from evolutionary psychology. And Dr. Lisle, you've kind of created this niche in evolutionary psychology about beating your genes. And from what I understand, it's that your genes are really trying to get you to do a couple of things. The most of which is actually they're trying to get you to do one thing, which is to spread your genes and make sure that they're on the world, in the planet a couple generations from now. And while that's all great and good, that's not necessarily the same things that create happiness. And so beating your genes is about figuring out what your genes are trying to get you to do. And if you're not being happy as a result, outsmarting your genes.
That's it. That's good. That's what we're going to call wisdom. Wisdom is figuring out that your instincts are not always serving your best interest long term. And so we have to figure out where we are getting goaded by some essentially primordial urges into doing things that are actually not in our long-term best interest.
And when it comes to love, sex, dating, and relationships, this seems to happen a lot, at least from what you've seen in your practice, right?
Certainly. In other words, people are walking around with a Stone Age brain inside their head, just in the same way that they've got Stone Age knees and ankles and eyebrows. In other words, your body parts were designed to survive in the Stone Age. And as a result of that, not only is your body a Stone Age body, but your mind is a Stone Age mind. Now, you may not think so because you read Sports Illustrated and watch LeBron James, and, if you're a gal, you might read Cosmo magazine, and you've read, the Bronte sisters, so that you think that you're this sophisticated thing called a human being. But actually, if we look past the superficial layers of civilization, we see that human beings are doing the same things that they have always done. They are climbing in dominance hierarchies. They are competing for mates. They are attempting to figure out what the village finds valuable and display those characteristics or give the village the values that they want in order to gain status or gain resources. They are trying to leverage their children into better locations in dominance hierarchies in the village in order to put themselves in advantageous situations for mating, because we are a bizarre species that actually is tracking our genes through our children all the way into our children's mating choices. So these are things that are timeless problems of human beings, and whether they had cars or horses or before that nothing, they are all still trying to go to the same place.
Very interesting. And so when it comes to modern dating, which is basically the same dance that our ancestors did, things changed just a little bit, but apparently not so much as I originally thought.
They've changed almost not at all. The truth of the matter is that in some ways it's easier today, in some ways it's more difficult. I don't know how many guys have been through the situation where you cannot tell what a woman really looks like because she's wearing so damn many clothes, or they're cleverly disguising her. You can't see any skin. So you really don't know what her body contours look like, so you really can't evaluate how sexually attracted to her that you are. And in the Stone Age, you wouldn't have that problem. You can just see it. So so there are things that are, obviously, we'd rather live today than in the Stone Age. The Stone Age was an awfully brutal place to live in many ways. But in some ways, the things that we are doing now that are sometimes difficult, for example, trying to figure out if we're sexually attracted to people before we can get their clothes off of them. Or, for example, another thing that we try to do today that they didn't try to do in the Stone Age is that we try to hold relationships together for 30 or 40 or 50 years. And that would have been a ludicrous goal in the Stone Age that never would have taken place. So so today we have a mixed bag. We have people in the modern world with many modern dilemmas, some of which are purely of our own creation, and they will sometimes do a number on the Stone Age mind as it tries to navigate its way through it.
And so nowadays, what are some common things? I know you said that some people are going to try to hold on to a relationship for 30, 40 years. Other people are going to try to either withhold sex or get it as fast as possible. What are some of the issues that come up if someone is trying to hold on to a marriage or a relationship for 30, 40 years?
Well, I think one of the things that happens is the way you have to look at this whole game of life is you have to look at it as this adventure that we are trying to enjoy. The purpose by which you were designed was you were designed to actually reproduce genes. And along the way, what nature did was nature gave you certain inducements in order to get that done. So nature made it so that you shivered and weren't happy when you were cold, that you sweated and you were uncomfortable when you were hot. If you hadn't had anything to eat for a while, you got hungry. And nature gave you lusty impulses to go after members of the opposite sex, and it gave you particularly differential amount of lust depending upon how sexually attractive those people were. It made sexual attractiveness actually quite objective, so stunningly so. In other words, certainly there's, quote, eye of the beholder, but the truth of the matter is that most of the beholders have very, very similar opinions as to what's sexually attractive in the opposite sex, and that's because they are evaluating the levels of mutations that are in those individuals of the opposite sex. So you can see essentially the errors in the genetic code by looking at their crooked noses or looking at their asymmetrical faces or body features, or looking at their lack or excess of muscle tissue, or looking at their small breasts or small hips, or looking at their bad skin, or looking at their falling out hair. In other words, there's all kinds of ways for human beings to actually evaluate the gene quality of people that they might be interested in, and they were designed to have lust responses to be more acute and greater as they saw less and less mutations. So in this way, the deep biology that's simply trying to reproduce DNA is actually weaving its way through human motivation very dramatically. I forget what your question was.
It was more about the
track.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of answering my question about what are some of the common issues that people fall into if they're trying to maintain a relationship for 30, 40 years, even though that is clearly not normal.
Right. That's not something that would have happened in the Stone Age very often. It's not characteristic of our species. That's characteristic of essentially modern financial arrangements, and that's sort of what's guiding that more than anything else. And there was a very interesting book published a few years ago that sort of talked about, and it's a book that had some very interesting points in it. It had some pretty big mistakes in it, but it had an argument from anthropology that was a very interesting argument that it makes, and with a lot of merit, and that is that because about 10,000 years ago, when human beings started to develop farming, they started to, for the first time, have wealth, because they settled into settlements and they were able to make improvements in real estate. And so for the first time, they actually had things that could be passed down of significance in terms of wealth. And so this was, Sex at Dawn takes a dim view of this, as many anthropological people do, which is, of course, ridiculous. It's unbelievably valuable to have wealth. And the wealth is going to have to be defended. You're going to have kingdoms and warfare and weaponry and all kinds of stuff. But the most important thing about wealth is that it's useful. So if you build a house and 400 years later some other people can still use it, that's fantastic. It means that somebody living 400 years ago built something that we're still using today, which is a fantastic economic residual asset and advantage for human beings. So you don't have to spend your time building that house in the same way that somebody did 400 years ago. And so as a result of wealth, however, and the utility of wealth, it winds up being extremely advantageous for every succeeding generation to have more of it than their sexual competitors. And so inheriting wealth becomes a very important issue, and directing wealth to children becomes a very important issue. And so you're going to have marriage spontaneously evolving in this situation, as well as all kinds of rules and taboos and so on and so forth. And so as a result, what we're going to wind up with is financial arrangements locking males and females together in this sort of sanctimonious process where it is that they're not supposed to be sleeping with anybody else, and this is sort of catastrophic and terrible and so on and so forth, because actually this is all about the fact that this wealth might then get directed away from your genes. So if you're a woman whose husband is philandering with somebody else, you want to make sure that the women on the other side of this understand that none of his wealth goes to their children, i.e. their children are, quote, illegitimate. If you're a man whose wife is sleeping around, you will probably, immediately get rid of her, and she'll have an A branded on her forehead, et cetera, et cetera. The reason being is this is a ruthless stealing of the male's resources, in the sense that his wealth would be directed towards her children that she would bear. And if they are not his, this is a horrendous biological disaster for him, because his accumulated wealth is now going to genes that are not his. So you can see, with wealth on the table, it ups the ante tremendously as to what's at stake when it comes to sexual fidelity. And when you change the game like this and you massively up the ante, and when we say up the ante, what it means is it's a tremendous influence, a new and novel influence on gene reproductive success. And so as a result, the wealth has now entered into the equation of human biology in a way that it has never entered into any animal's biology. And as a result of this, now we have rules and taboos, and now it's having to change, or there's going to put social forces on these relationships that were never there before. And this is where Sex at Dawn and other critics of modern marriage arrangements are accurate, in the sense that there's always been hurt feelings, and there's always been a little bit of social pressure and some gawking and gossiping, and mother-in-law is upset if anybody was cheating on anybody. But the bottom line is that there's been nothing like the sort of horrendous, chronic, and major social pressure on human beings to stay married and have all the money channeled directly to, let's make sure we know whose genes those are, as you have today. This is completely inconsistent with human biology, and the sort of long-term pair bonding, the 40 or 50-year pair bonding that we now see as appropriate, normal, moral, and correct, is a total aberration as to how this organism would have evolved.
And I'm assuming one of our first few shows, we talked about personality characteristics, and you talked about the sucker triad, which is basically when someone's very agreeable and they're conscientious and they're intelligent. That seems like a recipe for a disaster. If somebody's married and they're kind of being pressured into it, and they're intelligent enough to know that this is not normal and this is not natural for them to feel bad and feel trapped, but then they have to do the right thing because they're conscientious, and their disagreeable partner is pressuring them to stay, and everybody else is pressuring them to stay because it's the right thing to do.
Oh, this is a major recurrent theme in my practice over the last 25 years in psychology. There's absolutely people that are agreeable, emotionally stable, bright, and highly conscientious, and they wind up in a relationship possibly that they were not that interested in at the beginning, but they are so conscientious and agreeable that they go right ahead and agree to it anyway, and they figure that they'll make the best of it, it'll be fine. And before they know it, essentially there's a bunch of little stepping stones that sort of the entire social matrix starts jollying them along towards a wedding, and then they don't get out of it, and they may never get out of this thing. And yet what this thing should have been was a 2-month romance that failed its death, and that is exactly what it would have happened in the Stone Age. But today we can have something that looks quite different. And stunningly, we can have a extraordinarily mediocre life in terms of the happiness that is actually enjoyed by the individual in comparison to what could have been. And this is where the sort of hippie-style anthropologists are saying, we've got it worse off now than we've ever had it. Now, this is not correct. It turns out that the modern conveniences and modern wealth actually makes people happier than they are when they are in primitive-like situations. But this is, but we can't say that this is entirely true. If you're one of these people, it doesn't matter if it's you. If you're a person who has lived your last 40 years in a very mediocre marriage, and you have felt trapped by your church and your parents and the expectations of everybody else and your own conscientiousness about your children, et cetera, that you've sat right there in this muck and have choked this thing down, then, you would have been better off living in a Stone Age village.
Yeah, and, Sex at Dawn, I read that book, and they seem to conclude that because of this wealth, then it became increasingly more important for the holder of the resources to know the paternity of his kid, to make sure he knows which one's actually his. And the authors were making that argument. Yeah, the authors were making the argument that the conclusion from this is that we used to be carefree about the paternity of the child, and so people would just sleep with everybody in the village, depending on their attraction, and then they just kind of go along their way. And it's what the authors seem to be suggesting in Sex at Dawn is that we should be going back to that, where they talk about polyamory, or at least consensual non-monogamy, where you are upfront with potential partners that they're not going to be the only ones. What are your thoughts on that?
Sex at Dawn has a lot of very serious mistakes. These folks are not very knowledgeable in evolutionary psychology. They're smart people, but they're just not. They clearly did not examine the evidence very well, and they have a huge bias in their way of thinking. The guy that wrote it, the lead author, clearly got a swinging sort of psychology in his own head, and he's looking at all of humanity through those glasses. In I think one of the last chapters of the book called Confronting the Sky Together, where they're going to finally give their prescriptions about how to deal with this, they admit openly and dramatically and actually unconsciously just how they repudiate their entire thesis. The fundamental thesis of Sex at Dawn is that human beings would have been they point to animals like bonobos that are very promiscuous, or chimpanzees that are very promiscuous, and they say, well, see, look at that. What's wrong with that? And the answer is those are different species. It's not the same species. So they're going to have very, very different sexual arrangements depending upon the species, in the same way that chimpanzees don't talk. Okay? They don't do all kinds of things that people don't do. And so the chimpanzee has a brain of 500 cc's, and you've got a brain of about 13 or 1400. You're a massively different animal than a chimpanzee. We had a common ancestor, 8 million years ago. But, 8 million years is a long time. So you are not a chimpanzee. You're not a bonobo. You're not really anything close to those. You are a unique individual species that has a unique type of mating psychology that does not resemble that of a chimpanzee or a bonobo or a gorilla or orangutan or anything else. Now, what we see is that they actually make this point of, gee, if you're a female, do you really want your, or actually, if you're a female on the other side of a guy who's cheating, do you feel like, you should just, to retaliate, you should go cheat too, even if you don't want to. Now, when they admit that this is what they think would be going on in a marriage, when they're trying to get these marriages to open up and be free and wild, what they admit point blank is that it's the male who's going to want to go cheat, and the female wouldn't even want to, which is very typical of this species. And so this is actually very typical of what evolutionary psychologists are essentially trying to explain about male and female mating psychology. Now, this is not These are not extremely firm stereotypes, and there's a lot of individual variation here. But in principle, based on how the design of organisms, you would expect the case to be that the male that has vastly less possible investment in offspring than a female, in other words, a female of our species is going to have a huge investment in the offspring. It's going to be a minimum of 9 months gestation, plus at that point, the little critter is unbelievably helpless, and it's going to require a tremendous amount of female attention in order to get this thing all the way to viable at 16 or 17 years old. So as a result, and she can do that. Now, if she walks away when this kid is 2 years old from the male and says, it's your problem now, the truth of the matter is the male didn't have that much invested. He didn't go through that 9 months gestation, breastfeeding, and everything else. So the point is, if he walks off and leaves it, she's in a bind. She has more to lose than he has to lose. And because the male has far less to lose in abandoning a relationship or a child than a female does, then it's going to turn out that females by nature are going to be very interested in latching on to a male and having that male stick around and invest in offspring. Okay? They are going to follow that male around. Males are not going to follow females to their new job in Atlanta. That's not going to happen nearly as often as the female is going to follow the man to his new job in Atlanta. And so we still see exactly these same tendencies as would have been the case in the Stone Age. So the female has a stickier psychology who is hoping that the male loves them enough to stick around and provision their offspring. The male is designed by nature to signal those things in order to get into females' pants because females are looking for those signals. And so this is the fundamental underlying dynamic of how human psychology works. But the way it generally does not work is that it is unlikely that those people are very interested in each other sexually 10 or 15 years from now. Now, is it possible? Of course it's possible. Does it happen fairly often? Yes, it happens fairly often if you want to talk about raw numbers. But if you want to talk about percentages, what is the statistical likelihood that two people who at 25 are sexually attracted to each other, what is the statistical likelihood that they, even at that time, maybe early in the relationship, that they are both feeling very exclusively attracted to each other, that they are their own sexual private universe, and they really don't have any significant interests outside that pair bond. That will happen for a period of time, at which point it won't be too long before the male isn't thinking that way. It is very possible that the female largely could think that way indefinitely for her whole lifetime, and that the thought of actually sleeping with anybody else is vaguely interesting under idealized fantasy situations. But in all reality, she's never really seriously tempted. Okay? That would not be an uncommon psychological event in females. Now, again, for any listeners who are saying, "Boy, that's not my experience," granted, there's going to be large individual differences, and everybody's circumstances are different. Female is reasonably attracted to her mate, and they have a sexual relationship. It's very likely that she does not have a major stirring curiosity and a desire to, quote, spill her seed elsewhere. And the reason is that she cannot be pregnant more than once at a time. It's not possible. But so in a given year, a female can have exactly one child unless it happens to be twins. She can only have one birth in a year's time, whereas a male could have potentially 2,000. Okay, so the phenomenal difference biologically between males and females drives pretty substantial psychological differences in them in terms of their sexual psychology.
And so part of this sexual psychology, you were talking about the author tends to have a type of a swinging psychology or
yes.
swingers type of outlook. From what I gather from one of our last episodes, a few episodes back about personality characteristics, this is more on the spectrum of openness to new experience, where someone just is a little bit, maybe one or two standard deviations away, where now they've just got to have many, many more new experiences for life to feel fair.
There's no question. I have no doubt that author, I can't remember his name, Chris Ryan, that's his name, and his wife was a co-author. yes, I have no doubt that Chris Ryan is probably at the 90th percentile for openness to experience. So he's speaking right through his own truth. But this is not consistent. It's not highly consistent with human nature. Females are just not very promiscuous in this species. They are not being held in by intimidation and so on and so forth. Of course, some of them are, but this is not typical. Typically, the way this would go down is that sexual relationships get pretty uninteresting for a hell of a lot of people within a year or two, and people would have moved on, and a lot of that is going to be a male roving eye. It's going to be raising conflicts in relationships, and then certainly in marriages, if you were going to look at unhappy marriage partners, the females in unhappy marriages are not thinking, boy, would I really like to step out and have sex with other people. But that is very typical of male psychology. And so that's, to think that females are thinking very differently than that is really quite naive.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have some friends that are into polyamory, and we've talked about Sex at Dawn before. Yeah. And Sex at Dawn, I was always told that's like the Bible or like the beginning book for people learning about polyamory. And I
want to interrupt. Yeah, I want to interrupt you. It's a very interesting. If one ever reads Sex at Dawn, we just wandered on this topic, but if one ever reads it, if you read through it, you will actually, if you pay attention to the following concept. In Sex at Dawn, Ryan and his co-author make the point many times, quote, you can always find somebody to have sex with. The notion is that there's no sexual competition in humanity. There is no evidence in any of their prose that there is intense sexual competition. There is no evidence in their prose that there is tremendous ratings and lust differences depending upon how sexually attractive you find particular individuals. In their notion, it's as if we're all a bunch of average-looking chimpanzees that are stopping ourselves from screwing each other because of the church and modern wealth and all this kind of bullshit. But that is not true. The truth of the matter is that you see in humanity actually highly discerning and discriminating lust mechanisms, and that you see that females are generally very reticent for sex until they find out a lot about the character of the individual. This is not new to humanity since the dawn of wealth. Human beings obviously had to talk to each other, and romance and wooing and the getting together and getting to know each other, and for the female to find out what's in the male's mind and whether or not he's really into her, and whether or not he really likes her personality. This is characteristic of human beings, and it is utterly not characteristic of any other primate. So the notion of selection and competition does not make its way into the pages of Sex at Dawn. Now let's think about why. Because if you had very open to experience sexually promiscuous wild males, those males, the wilder they get, the less discriminating they are. In other words, pretty soon you can get yourself all the way to a male who he may be an 8, but he'd screw a 3, okay? And that kind of openness to experience starts to look like somebody that belongs in a bonobo, group. But that's an unusual human. The truth of the matter is most males show evidence of pretty high selectivity, and high selectivity tells you that the females have been putting up barriers and making males jump hoops and invest in offspring to a significant degree. And therefore, if they're going to have to invest to a significant degree in offspring, they're going to have to develop selectivity of their own. And so males and females are actually highly selective in their sexuality towards one another. And you see evidence of this in the ferocious sexual competitions that you see in any bar, in any high school. And in high school, there's no money anywhere in sight. It's all about how you look and how cool you are and how you dance and how much game you can spit. and how big your breasts are and how great your ass is, and whether you got a cute face. So, and it is intensively competitive. And so we all recognize that we're highly different in our reactivity to different individuals, and that there's a tremendous amount of objectivity in that. In other words, all the guys agree who the hottest, girls in the school are. And this tells you that there's a deep objectivity to this that was shaped by evolution in order to guide high discrimination in mating behavior. So the notion that it would be easy, if you reframe this, it would be easy for a whole slew of average males to have sex all they wanted with a bunch of highly attractive females, never happened once in history. Never. It's not characteristic of our species.
Damn, I can end my search now.
Too bad. I'm waiting for that day. If Chris Ryan knows where that's happening, I want to go there. I'll buy a ticket. I got a lot of left work to do on this planet.
I think there is. I think it's called Burning Man.
Yeah, there's got to be a lot of drugs flowing in those attractive females. That's what that is.
Yeah.
Yes. And believe me, at Burning Man, they have just enough discernment, even if they're higher than a kite. Pick the hot guys. I have no doubt. I've never been there, but I have no doubt that this is true.
All right. Well, so a couple of things came up after last episode from some listeners, and I actually had some questions too. We were discussing how, in general, the things that a man and a female should do is to focus on themselves, to be a hard worker, to develop a way to display their personality characteristics through their life. For instance, for a male, the advice you gave was to work hard, to focus on your resources, make sure you have a good job, make sure you have a good career, you have a good car, some good clothes, make sure that you're respectful, are able to carry on an intellectual conversation, or at least some sort of intelligent conversation. Don't be cheap, don't be obese. And then in terms of going to the gym and being, trying to be like a bodybuilder, super fit, what is that? There has to be a hierarchy there, or a priority there. What in your opinion is the focus?
Yes, that's actually very interesting. We have research on this, and so we know a couple of sort of fascinating mistakes that are made by both males and females here. It turns out that males believe that females are very impressed by and very attracted to males that are bigger and stronger, and et cetera. And it turns out that females also believe that males are attracted to females that are extremely thin. Now, this is sort of kind of interesting that they're they've got mutual delusions here. The truth of the matter is that whoever you are, you are. Let's take if you're a male, for example, and if we were to look at a bell curve of how testosteronized your musculoskeletal system looks. So you've got testosterone cues in your face and your jaw and your forehead, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's your voice, for example, even your coloring. So there are, if you're darker colored, long jaw. It's a deep voice. Those are testosterone cues. But the most major and obvious testosterone, including your behavior, like how assertive you are, for example. But the most obvious testosterone cue is your musculature. So let's suppose you're a guy who's let's suppose your average height 5'10", and you're 5'10" and you're 165 pounds. Okay, so you're sort of a medium build guy. You're not skinny, you're not mesomorphic, and you're not fat. You're sort of right in the middle of a very typical kind of bell curve. Now, the question would be, should you take steroids and get up to 185 and get to be a lot bigger and stronger? Would that significantly raise your sexual attractiveness to women? The answer is absolutely not. it does not. What it does is it changes the women for whom you are found to be attractive. So let's suppose that our guy in principle is an 80th percentile looking guy in terms of his facial structure. We're going to ignore everything else about him: his brains, his job, his clothes, his car, his voice, and his basically how much game he's got and how smooth he is personally. We're going to hold all of those things constant, and we're going to say, look, he has the opportunity that if he goes to the gym and works out ferociously and takes just a little bit of steroids, we can go to 185 pounds, which would be tremendous. It would change his morphology significantly. The question is, does this take him to an 8 to a 9? And it absolutely does not take him to an 8 to a 9. It really will not significantly change where he is on the bell curve of attractiveness. It will change who is attracted to him. So women, our guy at 5'10", 165 pounds, is essentially in the middle of the bell curve for male size. And so as a result, we would expect, if he's in the middle of the bell curve, we would quite reasonably expect that the middle of the bell curve would be a pretty good place to be in human evolution. If it was so great to be bigger than that, then there would be more people bigger than that. And so it turns out that's a pretty safe bet to be right there. So if you look at all your movie stars from the last 50 years, 60 years, the big heartthrobs, you're going to find Paul Newman was 5'10" and about 150 pounds. Robert Redford, very similar build. Tom Cruise, a little more musculature, not that tall. Brad Pitt, probably 6 foot 180, et cetera. This is sort of what people are. And so you're looking right down the middle of the bell curve, and women are more reactive. It's much more important in terms of facial characteristics and other things, and personality characteristics and so forth. So you're not going to buy a lot. Now some women are going to say, oh, no, that's not true for me. Yeah, that's not true for them. So they aren't sitting in a normal place sitting in the bell curve. They may be women that are highly reactive to a bigger, heavier musculature, at which point we've now changed who it was. We dropped a few off on the other end. So if you can imagine a male bell curve, I don't know what I think the average weight of an American male is about 5'9", 180, by the way, but that's because they're fat. So the average male is not 5'9", 180 and ripped. 5'10", 165, 70 pounds is an extremely athletic, strong male if we've got him ripped. Now, so think about a female bell curve of what it is that they prefer, and understand that's somewhere in a medium build is about where the average female finds very appealing. Now, you would expect that the bell curve would also say that females would also, there would be some females that would be highly preferring males that had bigger builds. You would also surprisingly find that there are females also on a smaller part of the bell curve, on the other side of it, that would prefer males that were thinner. Now, probably my guess is there are more women that it's probably not quite a bell-shaped curve. It could be a somewhat skewed distribution. There's probably more females that prefer bigger, stronger males than prefer thinner ones. However, there are reasons why the middle of the bell curve, the medium build, is probably generally the most preferred build by females towards males. And the reason is when you get to be big and strong, you have essentially higher than average levels of testosterone, which means that might be real nice if you throw a son who also has high levels of testosterone and is potentially more dominant and stronger than his conspecific competitors. However, your daughter is going to be a little stud, and she's not going to be very attractive, okay? So this is going to be very common that you're going to have, Muhammad Ali, believe me, all of his wives were stunning. But if you look at his daughters, they're pretty, but they're big and tough, and this is so you are starting to place the the androgens in the female are a little too high relative to what the average man finds sexually ideal. So you will find women that are actually turned off as males get above the bell curve average for strength and musculature, and you'll find females that are turned on. So as you move yourself from one place on the bell curve to another, you're going to pick up some, but you're going to lose some. And therefore, that is a lousy place to invest. What you want to be is you want to be a good rendition of yourself. So if you are 5'10" and 165 pounds, but you don't exercise very much and you're not in the greatest shape and you're kind of so-so, then you would probably be better off being 5'10" and 168 and taken off 4 pounds of fat and added 7 or 8 pounds of muscle, and now you are an excellent rendition of yourself. Spending time trying to push yourself effectively unnaturally to 175 pounds is a total waste of time. All you're doing is you're picking up some points on the one end and you're losing some girls on the other end, and there's probably very little net benefit. Get yourself in good condition for your own morphology, and after that, get a good hairstyle, get good clothes, get a good job, and invest in your own personal development so that you become as good of a partner as you can be, and with as much to trade as possible, and then just act naturally because you are that person.
And so when you say bell curve, there's a bell curve
Yes.
for the sixes, the sevens, the eights. They all have their own bell curve in terms of who
correct.
they can get. So an 8
Right.
is never. If someone's got is a 7 or an 8, they're never
Right.
going to become a 9 or 10 through really hard work or steroids or whatever it is.
No, of course not. No, there are too many cues on your body, most particularly face, skeletal structure, postural issues, etc. Even psychological characteristics are important here. So you could be very handsome. For example, I knew the guy that was one of the Marlboro men, and he was, and I met him when he was about 50. And this guy was, he wasn't gay, but I'm telling you, he was 85% of the way there. He was very effeminate. And yet I could see, and once in a while he would pose just for fun for our little group. He was a psychologist. He would pose a little bit like he used to when he was 25 for the Marlboro commercials. And it was a crack up because he could actually look really tough and look like a real Marlboro man. He had the acting gene in there because he had done some acting, and he had it in there, and he still had this chiseled jawline and all this masculinity. But the guy was just an absolute sweetheart teddy bear who couldn't rope a cow or even get in a fist fight to save his life. Okay, there was just no way. All right, and the thing is that when women would find out about his history, they would kind of roll their eyes and chuckle because it would be like, yeah, he is still kind of handsome. We could see that, but i.e., so what? The guy is a total sissy, and I am not impressed. So you can't just look at size, strength, musculature, handsomeness, etc. We also have to throw in the fact that you are who you are to a large extent personality-wise, and that makes you a niche operator. And so this guy, even though he would have increased his niche by being different personality-wise, he can't be different personality-wise. So, he always had partners. There's always girls that thought he was pretty, and those girls were girls that didn't mind pretty boys who acted like pretty. So there you go.
So it doesn't matter. You can fake your outside appearance, but you can't fake your inside your inside.
Yeah.
So
and you can't fake your outside too much either. They're all going to smoke it out pretty soon.
Well, I'm thinking I'm thinking nowadays. Let's say a woman has smaller breasts, or she wants to fake certain appearances, so she can get plastic surgery, or a man can get pec implants, or I don't know, whatever kind of nonsense they do. to fake all this. You can fake it, but the minute you open your mouth, the minute someone notices your facial cues, your facial expressions, how nervous you are around more attractive people, they can sniff out right away how many mutations you have.
They're going to sniff a lot out. Now, I will say that there are, in some ways, you can imagine what goes on today in women's heads around breasts. This is a fascinating area of discussion for me, just generally, because I'm a male. But you can, as an evolutionary psychologist and as well as a clinical psychologist, this phenomenon is really quite a novel bunch of curveballs to throw at generations since this was invented. You can think about this because breast in women is very analogous to musculature in men. So you can imagine that some women might think, well, God, men are just so go gaga over big breasts, so maybe I should get them huge. In the same way that men are thinking, well, women are so gaga over musculature, maybe I should go huge. So you can see that. But men will also very clearly tell you that you have these preferences somewhere near the middle of the bell curve. Most men are attracted to women whose breasts are the average size, and then they go on either side of the bell curve from there. And so some men are much more attracted to the breast gets bigger. Some men actually prefer it when the breasts are very small and the woman is much leaner and more athletic looking. So these are these individual differences in preferences, and those differences are sitting largely in the middle of the bell curve, but with a tendency towards bigger breasts being more attractive in the species, as there's a tendency for bigger muscles to be more attractive. Now, it's not a huge dramatic issue, but women who are small-breasted definitely feel like they would increase their market share by getting breast implants, and they do. And the problem is then you have an evolutionary arms race, because suddenly now there is a way, if you are a smaller-breasted woman who was, for example, a 7.5 because of your small breasts, and you have a competitor that was a 7.5 because she has small breasts, but now she went and got breast implants, and that bumps her up to an 8.25. Now you are at a competitive disadvantage, and you are now, and you feel that competitive disadvantage. So the evolutionary arms race, or the competitive pressures, certainly puts pressure on people to cheat. It's just like on a test in a final. I was once in a final. I couldn't believe what they did. They told us at the beginning of the class, if we catch you cheating once, we're going to warn you, and if we catch you the second time, then you're going to get an F. And we, like anybody with any brains, we looked at each other and said, "You got to be kidding me! I can't believe you just said that." Like, now you're making it so that I have to cheat, since I know everybody else is cheating. I don't have any choice. You know what I'm saying? And I remember I didn't cheat on that final. I was well prepared for it, but boy, was I hot under the collar that was announced. It's like, you've got to be kidding. And so this is the same kind of thing that's going on. That's why you've got 2 million men in the United States shooting steroids, and that's why you've got several million women with breast implants, is because they are responding to an evolutionary arms race.
Now, you said that the male, no matter how hard he works, he can't raise his genetic cachet. He can't become a 9 after being an 8, or even more so. But with a woman, she can go from a 7.5 to like an 8.25 just by getting breast implants.
I think so. Yeah, I believe. I think that I wouldn't want to. We'd actually have to do research to find out. I'm giving you the research that has been published. David Buss has written a classic called The Evolution of Desire, and he has done much subsequent research has been published on these issues. And Nancy Etkoff, who wrote Survival of the Prettiest, reviews a tremendous amount of research on sexual attractiveness and preferences in bodies and so on and so forth. I can't tell you that, well, I believe if you are an average build male and in good shape, I don't think you're going to raise your cachet. In the same way, I think if you're a female and you're of average breast size and you get them bigger, I think you more change your market than increase it. If you were small-breasted women and then moved it to middle, I think you might literally be increasing your sexual attractiveness generally across the board. You would not be increasing it with the men who happen to prefer the smaller breasts. But if we were looking at your overall ratings and what would be happening to your score given 1,000 males judging you, I think that we're going to find that there's not much action going from medium to big, but there's probably more action from going from below average to average. And the same thing with male musculature. I don't think there's a lot of action, from what I could tell from the research, that there'd be a lot of action going from medium excellent build to big, but I think that there would be more action that we could probably objectively show increase in general female preference for males when you go from a slight build to medium build. So I think those profits are sitting there. You have a major issue with diminishing returns for both breast size and with male musculature when you go from medium to big.
Because there's only so much time in a day. So.
And there's so many other factors. In other words, so you start to essentially going from very small breasted to medium breasted, or going from very slight male to medium build male, if you could do such a thing. The point of the matter is that essentially you're taking care of what the market would look at as a deficiency. But once you get rid of that, in other words, but that deficiency is sitting in a matrix of all the other characteristics about you. So, so for example, if you were an exceptionally attractive woman that that the one thing that was missing was you were very flat chested. I think that what would happen is that some males would consider you to be a 10 exactly as you are, but that might be only 10% of the male market might consider that. Whereas, 90% of the rest of the market would consider you a 9 that almost was a 10 if only you had medium-sized breasts. And then if you got those medium-sized breasts put on you, then in clothes at least, you may have essentially checkmated essentially the entire market. A massively greater number would consider you a 10, but you might have lost a few of the males who actually preferred you flat-chested, but you would have had a general net gain in the market. The point here is, here's what I'm really trying to say with a hell of a lot of words and far too many. We are, in fact, all niche marketers. We're all selling our own kind of hamburger. There isn't McDonald's and Jack in the Box in 5 different places. There's 50,000 different kinds of hamburger stands, and they all do their hamburgers a little bit different. Okay. Now, the thing is that so if you are a certain kind of 7, you're not going to twist yourself into an 8 or a 9. Your better play is to do a really good job of being, what it is that you are across the board of all of your fitness indicators. And then the point is that we're trying to find somebody who thinks we're an 8, because somebody does. So if you're a 7, you're somebody's 8 if you get your act together. And if you're an 8, you're somebody's 9 if you get your act together. And you're trying to find that somebody who you think, who maybe, if you're a guy and you're an 8, you are somebody's 9, and that person that you're looking for, you hope, is a 9.5, or who's a 9 that you think is a 10. And so you wind up with the magic 10%, and both of you excited. The mistake is if you're a natural 8 and your displays make you look like a 7, because you got a lousy car, lousy clothes, lousy career, and lousy musculature, and a lousy haircut. So you make the mistake and you got lousy conversation. So the point is that if you do a mediocre job, then you are not a good rendition of you, and that's what you need to do.
And so the difference between short-term casualty and long mating strategy is from what we've talked about on the show. Let's say a male is a 7 and he's engaging.
Yeah.
He will only is your casual mating strategy if the female is much less attractive than his, but she's interested. Whereas he will want to be in a long-term pair bond if he perceives her to be way more attractive than he is. Did I get that right?
Yeah. So the basic structure.
Or was I too harsh?
Think about this in terms of mirror images, because you can understand male and female behavior if you understand that a great deal of what's going on in their behavior is absolute mirror images. So, for example, the females are wanting to, in casual mating strategy, females are only wanting to sleep up. They want to be with people that are fancier than they are, smarter, better looking, better educated, just better, more money, like everything. Certainly looks is the dominant issue that they're looking for there, but not only. They're also, interestingly enough, looking for males that are more intelligent and accomplished. This was very well demonstrated by a study done by David Buss and his colleagues. I believe it was at the University of Texas at Austin. They had an attracted member, a male or female.
This was the sexual conflict theory?
Yeah, I'm not sure what they call it, but they had good-looking guys go up to good-looking girls and say, hey, I've noticed you around town or noticed you around campus, and, I just find you really attractive, and, hey, I just really like to spend the afternoon with you, in bed, and, what do you think about that? And so I think they did that 26 times, and they went 0 for 26. When the opposite side of the equation, right, the opposite side of the equation, when attractive females went up to attractive males and said the same thing, they had huge positive feedback. Males were very interested, and the ones that said no, that they had girlfriends, said, well, maybe we could take a rain check. Everybody's like twisting themselves into a pretzel because they want to do it. All right. So this was a very different response. Then I think that's one story. Another story was when they asked males and females about if they were going to have a long-term relationship, what they're looking for versus a short-term. And it turns out that males, for example, if it's a short-term relationship, they couldn't give a rat's ass about how smart the female is. Couldn't care less. Whereas if a female is looking at a short-term relationship, no, that's a very important issue. In other words, they don't want to mate with an idiot, which is fascinating, but this is true. So the females much more selective across the board on all issues than males are when it comes to casual mating. Males are reducing their stringency of requirement because they have to. Remember, the female is on the other side of this is getting more stringent. So let's think, for example, about what goes inside the head of a female who's a 6. When it comes to a pair bond, she's willing to take a 5 who's willing to put a big diamond on her finger and say that he swears eternal allegiance to her and he'll give her everything in the world that he can get his hands on. Okay? Why is he willing to say this? Because he's sleeping up. So that female is willing to sleep down in order to get resources along with the deal. But a female who's a 6 looks at an 8 and finds herself weak in the knees. And the 8 is looking at her like, you know what, I ain't sticking around, after 9 o'clock, and it's 7:30 now. And so the point is that the male is willing to sleep down, but only under considerations where it's going to be short-term. The female is willing to sleep up, when it's short-term consideration. Would a female also be willing to sleep up in the long term? Of course, but she can't get that situation. The male is not willing to sleep down for long-term considerations. So the female is. So females sleep down for long-term mating or are willing to. They don't want to, but they're willing to, and they pretty well have to most of the time. The males are, why? Because the males are only willing to get locked down in long-term relationships if they feel like they're sleeping up. And so this is because they're bringing resources along with them. So males and females have a mirror image of their mating psychologies and preferences and requirements with respect to short and long-term mates, and that's the way the game is played.
Now, it seems that, if I'm understanding this correctly, that if there's a long-term pair bond going on, male sleeping up, whereas the woman sleeping down, who's really benefiting here except for the male? I mean,
the female is benefiting. The female is benefiting from the notion that the male's, quote, in love, and what in love means is he's going to bring resources. Okay. Remember, the male has the opportunity of impregnating the female and walking over the hill, and never investing in that offspring. And so that is a part and parcel of male psychology. That's what casual mating is all about. And so the male absolutely can do that, and he sticks her in a biological bind where she's going to have to put all this energy into a gene reproduction device, i.e. her child, which is 50% of the guy's genes. So he absolutely skins the cat on this issue as a biological reproductive strategy. And so this is why the female wants to see adoration in the male's eyes, why that is such a big deal. And that's why the female is, really not very interested in mating unless she gets that situation. If she is going to mate and she doesn't have that situation, it's because she's sleeping up in a big way. She's weak in the knees.
And so would a woman who's sleeping down in a long pair bond, is she super excited about the guy, or is she just excited about the resources he's bringing?
Well, I think what we find is it's an amalgam. The females are evolutionarily designed to essentially mold those two factors inside their head into one general aesthetic response. So so it sort of takes a little time for that to happen. So females are falling in love at a slower pace than males. This is well documented. Males can be in love in 5 seconds. In other words, it's not uncommon for males to look at a female and think, I think I'm in love with you, and they don't know anything about her, okay? That's because there's no evolutionary reason for them to not feel that if they feel like she is a superior physical specimen to them. And so whereas a female is designed with tremendous what I'm going to call egg defenses, and her eggs are a reproductive treasury that the male is designed by nature to try to figure out how to pick the lock.
It reminds me, when I was younger, I used to play hockey when I was in high school on a men's team, like an adult team, and there was always like guys who'd been divorced and just been married, and they kind of dumped all their advice onto me, the young kid who didn't know anything about dating at that time. And one of the guys, he ended up telling me, he goes, "Hey kid, just remember, girls need a reason, guys need a place." And I remember thinking this is true, but it seems like what you're saying is that this is relatively accurate.
Yes, absolutely. That's quite accurate.
But Dr. Lisle, I've got, somebody sent me a joke the other day. They said if I had $1 for every girl who found me unattractive, they'd all eventually find me very attractive.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. We got to write that down somewhere and store it. That's a fantastic joke.
Dr. Lisle, thank you for coming on again. We'll look forward to having you back next time.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks very much for listening. We will be back next week, Wednesdays, 7:30 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Beat Your Genes Radio with Dr. Doug Lisle, and I am Nate G., your host. And we will see you next week.